Welcome back to another episode of the Outdoor Adventures Hunting Podcast right here on Brownfield Ag News. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Brent Barnett, and we appreciate you joining us again here this week. Joining us today is Kent Boucher. He's been on the program several times throughout this hunting season, and we're happy to have him back on. He's a friend of mine from the area where I'm at. Kent, how's it going?
Doing pretty good, Brent. We're getting buried right now. It's been a week of snow. We deserve it though. It was like in the high 30s, maybe low 40s throughout pretty much all of. Well, there were even days like hitting close to 60 in December, and then through January, the first week was pretty warm, but now we're paying our dues, man. We're getting slammed.
I tell you what, it has been a mild fall and winter up to this point, like you said. This first round that hit us at the beginning of the week, I don't know about where you're located, Kent, but here where we're at, we had about 10 and a half to 11 inches at our house. And then 2 nights ago, we had another 2 to 3 overnight. And as you and I record today, I'm not sure just how much snow has come down because it's blowing around like crazy and we're under a blizzard warning as we talk. But I went
Mm-hmm.
out and did a measurement back on our back table on the porch, and it was at 16 and a half inches. That was just compiled
Whoa,
the week. So I don't know if that's an official measurement, but we have not
it
disturbed
sounds
that
right.
table. And so it's like a very level surface, and it's at 16 and a half and counting because it's still coming down right now.
Yeah, where we live here, we're out in the sticks, and which would be a good time to warn the listeners that I have the Elon Musk Starlink internet, and it's going strong right now through the blizzard. But if it cuts out a little bit, my apologies. But yeah, we're out here in the sticks, and there's no like windbreaks from other houses or, just the tight yards, with everyone having a couple trees in their yard, that kind of thing, and so the wind just whips across the open fields and pastures around us, and there's no way we could get a snow measurement out here. Like there's nowhere that isn't influenced by the wind. We have drifts along our snow fence right now that are probably pushing 5 feet deep, and we have snow piles everywhere. I've had to blade off the drive with a big old Ford TW. Which, by the way, I know this is on Brownfield Ag News. If there's any listeners out there that got any like good tips on checking the wiring for lights on a Ford TW15, please reach out to me on like Instagram or Facebook or something, and I'd like to chat with you. I had to do some plowing in the dark last night, and that was not the safest situation, I'm sure. So it's getting pretty deep around here though, and then in some spots, like I'm looking out my window here at the base of my driveway, and it's bald, but right next to it, the ditch that's about 4.5, 5 feet deep is filled all the way to the top with snow. So it's the planet Hoth out here for you Star Wars fans.
Well, if we're gonna get it, we might as well just get all the snow at once, I guess. This is officially the Snowmageddon podcast episode
Yeah,
for
man.
Outdoor Adventures. All right.
You hope it's that way. Maybe we'll be like we get a big old blizzard in like February or something. You'd be like, man, I wish it was back in January when we only had 16 inches of snow.
Hey, look on the bright side. At least this snow didn't come when you took your rut vacation or something like that, and then that was
That's
the
right.
week that you had to hunt, and there was 15 inches of snow on the ground. You're trying to work
That's
back into.
right. That's right. That was, where I hunt for my rut trip every year is kind of a remote spot. And that's always one of my concerns is, am I going to get stuck out there? It's just, if you got, if you got in a position where you couldn't get out, you'd be a while before you had some help. So you bring up a good point. However, I would have used these temperatures, like if it had been in the 20s. Oh man, that would have been a million times better. Instead, it was like in the 70s.
Kent, overall, as we look at the season that has just concluded, what was it like for you? I'll just say for me, movement during the early and rut time of the season, I only had one deer in bow range the entire time. That just could have been I wasn't in the right spot at the right time. But it wasn't until I went on some late season hunts, not only here in our area, but hunting with a friend of mine on his farm invited me down in South Central Iowa, and
Mm.
that was a late December hunt right before January, and saw more deer in one sit in bow range than I had the entire season. So it was almost as if the late season was better for me this year. I didn't end up filling any tags, but had some good experiences out there. What was it like for you?
Yeah, well, sorry it was such a tough season for you. I think I don't know if you're a member of Iowa Bowhunters Association. You should definitely join if you aren't. In fact, one of the board members I think is local to us, but uh, they sent out an email this week. They just sent another one this morning. I haven't read it yet. Um, and they had, you know, made some posts on Facebook, and I think had some maybe did some kind of an email survey or something that referenced in that email that they sent this last week, saying, "Hey, reports across the state are most places deer sightings were significantly down. There were a few places that seemed to stay the same, but I think what you observed is a pretty common thing. And from my opinion, uh, uh, I think, I mean, first of all, it was a very dry end of the summer throughout much of the state, especially in our area here. USDA drought map labeled at least my county, which is one county over from you, but only, we live 10 minutes apart. Um, for my county, at least, I know hit severe drought status for the threshold of 8 consecutive weeks. Excuse me. And after 8 weeks of steady drought, severe drought status, it opens up CRP acres for um, either grazing or haying up to, I think, 50% of the seeding, and allows farmers to, um, hay it and sell it, or hay it and feed it. And normally you're not allowed to do that. And so um, it shows you just how bad things were in this part of the state. I know the county, a couple counties south of us were even worse. A friend of mine who's a big whitetail guy, well-known whitetail guy. In fact, he was just in the state at the Capitol this week, um, urging legislators to not allow whitetail outfitters to receive additional tags that they can sell at elevated prices to non-resident hunters, which I am very much in favor of. Them not being able to do that, because it you know takes away from our resource here in the state, from us, residents, but also it it puts other, working class whitetail hunters from other states that have to wait in line to draw a tag. It bumps them further back in the line. And so just wanted to give a shout out to my friend Steve on that. But uh, he had he had planted some beans, probably in uh, late April. And if I remember correctly, he had a Facebook or an Instagram post that those beans had not yet come up. And it was like early July. It hadn't rained, not a drop since he planted. It was just so dry. And they've had, I think this was the third straight year of very hard drought where he's at. And so, all that to say, we had major EHD outbreaks around the state, and we still don't know the extent of that, because it's not shed season yet. We don't have guys looking, wandering every square inch of deer habitat looking for sheds, and that's when we find all the dead heads, right? And so we don't really know the full extent yet as to it. I myself came across, I may have mentioned this in a previous episode that I was on, myself and my friend Caleb, we came across a pretty large EHD kill site. I think we found 6 dead deer. And he went back and found another dead buck, that same kill site. Um, there was a spot that I heard over in, I believe it's in Marion County, where a landowner was finding them by the dozens every day. And I think, if I remember, uh, if it's the same person, which I think it is, I have a good reliable source on it, on who it would be. Um, I was listening to Midwest Whitetails podcast, and somebody on there had mentioned they knew of someone who had lost on their 1,200 acres of farm ground that they have. They had lost. They'd at that point had gotten up to 320 deer they counted on their 1,200 acres that have died of EHD. So that's a major, you know, population effect in that locality there, right? And that's going to, those are going to affect what people are seeing, but also with the warmer temps, what I really think it is a lot of, when I was on here for the rut episode, I mentioned how warm it was when we were hunting. In fact, what was interesting is I didn't know it yet, but when I was recording with you, I was in the like early stages of major dehydration because it was so warm, and you got to put on your warm gear. And I had a mile hike to my stand. You got to put on your warm gear when you're hiking in because you're going to need it when the temperature drops, right? In the evenings or first thing in the morning. Well, I didn't realize how much I was sweating, and I ended up super dehydrated and got very sick the next day, and wasn't even able to hunt. um, but uh, when the temperatures are like that, like they were through November, like Brent, other than the very end of the month, we had that, I don't know, maybe 6 inches of snow or so at the end of November. Um, Temps dipped really low then. But like other than that, I think almost all of November here at our latitude was over, every single day was over like 55 degrees, uh, in the afternoons. And a lot of those days were in the 60s, pushing 70 degrees. And a guy that I know you've had on the podcast several times, who's just one of the best whitetail guys there is, Bill Winky. I heard him once mention that um, when it gets above 50 degrees, deer movement just kind of stops. And so the rut is still going to happen, right? But it's just going to be at night. And so I think a lot of the activity that we saw through almost all of this season was uh nighttime. The heaviest activity for deer was after shooting light. And that's just kind of unfortunate for us deer hunters, right? It's going to hurt what we're seeing. Deer getting back to bed earlier in the morning, and they're not coming out until after we're already walking back to the truck. And so it's going to hurt deer sightings as well. So I think you know there's just kind of the perfect storm for not a great year of sightings. That being said, in some ways I had, perhaps my best season this year. Um, I did not kill a buck. This is the first time since 2017 that I did not harvest a buck. Um, but um, I did shoot 2 deer. I got my first bow kill this year on a nice mature doe here on my home farm, and it was a good clean kill. Um, I've had a very up and down journey as a bow hunter. I think every year that I've bow hunted, I've shot a deer, but this is the first time I've actually been able to put it all together and get finally a lethal hit on it. Every other thing has just been a wound, unfortunately. Um, so that was a huge positive for me. And then in late November, it would have been like the last day of November, I headed with my friend Caleb to northwest Nebraska, and we did a mule deer hunt. And we each uh, we got some permission on a ranch there, and the ranch manager said, "Yep, you guys are welcome to come out and hunt. The only stipulation is you can't shoot any mule deer bucks. You can shoot a whitetail buck, you can shoot a mule deer doe, you can shoot a whitetail doe, just can't shoot any mule deer bucks." And unfortunately, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, just as luck would have it, we had to pass on, I don't know, maybe 4 easy buck opportunities with our muzzle loaders. And but we did get to each harvest mule deer does. And so, I added a new species. This is the first year I've tagged multiple deer in one season, so that was great. Got my first bow kill. Still a first gen hunter experience in a lot of ways for me, but but a great year all in all. Got meat, for the family. We've already been enjoying it a lot so far this winter, and you know what? I'm looking forward to that good momentum going into next year. And there were some decent young bucks that I saw. Um, Passed on a few that I'm looking forward to surviving the winter, hopefully, and coming back as a well, I think that we'll still need a couple of years. A couple of them were, I think, only 2.5s, but I saw a couple 3.5s that were really nice already. That hopefully will be back as mature deer next year. So, all in all, pretty good season, man. Got out there and did some pheasant hunting too, and there were a lot of birds this year for pheasants. Pheasant numbers were good. Uh, Kind of you know, like a two-edged sword with pheasants is, if we have a really dry spring, which we don't want too much rain in the spring, of course, and we can't do the farm work that we need to do in the spring, but we definitely need some moisture, build up those water tables a little bit, and carry us through into the drier months. But with that comes springtime flooding, and just where the way Iowa is, most of our pheasant habitat is going to be in creek bottoms and river bottoms. And so when we get that flooding, it breaks out of those banks, floods out nests, chills the eggs, and hurts the overall population for that year. Since our spring we had decent moisture this spring, but it was still beyond the dry end. We didn't have any flooding to worry about, and we had a pretty mild winter last year, with the exception of around Christmas time last year. Things got really nasty. I don't know if you remember that. It was like 40 something low wind chill. We got quite a bit of snow into winter, and so bird numbers were pretty good this year. Um, uh, I shot a couple of birds, saw a lot of birds out at my place, but just, we have some of the best habitat in our area where we're located for pheasants. And our neighbor across the road has probably even a little bit better pheasant habitat. And the birds just kind of move back and forth across the road. And you got to kind of just hit it lucky, um, when you go hunting. So we saw a lot of birds, but didn't shoot a ton, but still just a lot of fun. So pretty good hunting season this fall.
Yeah, sounds like one to remember, Kent. And I was thinking back while you were talking. I believe I remember seeing a report from the Iowa state climatologist who we've had on Brownfield Ag News quite a bit. And if I recall
Mm,
correctly, I think November 2023 was the third warmest for Iowa on record. So that kind of tells you a little
man.
bit about the weather pattern there. Looking ahead, though, as we kind of, uh, turn the halfway point here on the podcast, want to
Yeah,
focus on what you'll be doing the next couple of months here. We've never really discussed shed hunting on the Outdoor Adventures podcast.
sure.
Um, I've only maybe gone shed hunting 2, maybe 3 times in my life, and the only time I've ever found a shed is if I trip over it, or just get lucky or something like that. I've never really been good at it, but I also haven't gone very much. So
Sure.
this is something you're really passionate about, and I'd love to
Hmm.
have you kind of take the conversation here and just discuss, your passion for shed hunting and just some of the strategies that go into it.
Yeah, you're right. You're spot on with it being a passion. I like shed hunting just as much as I like bow hunting. Uh, and there's all like lately there's been this kind of derogatory uh, mood towards shed hunting from a lot of hunters. There's all the statements, oh, you can't eat the antlers, or shed hunter is just an old term for bad hunter, or whatever. And they're funny, like, let's be honest, it's kind of funny. But um I I get all that, um but I think it's kind of an excuse just to be able to stay warm and in on the couch and wind down from the physicality of a you know hunting season before. But for myself, and again, my friend Caleb, who I mentioned earlier, like this is just where we shift into a different gear, like now we're excited to get into all those nooks and crannies of the deer habitat that we've been kind of hunting around the fringes of, so that we don't blow deer out of there. Now we're getting into the time of year where we can go in there and see what were the deer doing. Where exactly were they bedding? Was there some kind of interior food source they were hitting? What like, how many beds are we finding? Does that give us an idea of just how many deer we're hanging out in here? Is it similar? Are those deer numbers and deer presence similar on a year where the crop rotation is, there's corn surrounding this piece of timber, or is it different when there's beans in here? There's all that stuff that you get a gain from it. And so really there's a ton of scouting value. Now I will admit, um, there's a guy I know, who writes for North American Whitetail, Clint McCoy. Some of you may know him as Deer Hunter DVM, is kind of his sign off name on all of his articles, because he's a veterinarian. But Clint says that he approaches the off season kind of in a twofold way, and I think I'm going to try his method this year a little bit more. Historically, January 10th rolls around, and you know my next day off of work, I'm probably going to be out there for, because there are antlers on the ground. My friend Caleb just found one on Tuesday, believe it or not. Found his first fresh shed of the year, a really nice one. And so there are some bucks that'll drop this time of year, injured deer. So deer that got injured in a fight during the rut, deer that got hit by a car, deer that, um, uh, maybe just were wounded during archery season, or got a non-vital hit during the gun season. Those deer are going to shed earlier. Their testosterone levels, as they go into that like self-preservation mode and healing mode, their testosterone levels plummet, which is what triggers antler drop. And so then the sheds are gonna there are already some sheds on the ground, very few but some. And normally I try to go find those early ones, and but most of the time you don't come up with much this time of the year. And so what Clint does is he says he puts headphones on his head, and he walks into the woods this time of year, and he is not looking for sheds at all. Instead, he's just purely doing a scouting effort. He's trying to go as close as he can to when deer season was going on, and find out where are the deer now, because that's going to be that's going to be most useful for the next deer season. Then he says once March hits or late February hits, now he's done doing his scouting for the most part, and now he's really focused on finding antlers. And I think that's a good way to maybe approach it. Just because if all you do the people that criticize shed hunting, they have a point. If all you do is just shed hunt, you do miss out on stuff. Like you should be having your Spartan Forge app open. You should be dropping pins on where you should be putting a stand for next year, or maybe a heavy trail route that you should be marking, or putting down a food source you find, or a bedding area. You should be marking all that on your Spartan Forge or whatever scouting app you use, um, to save for the next season. But when you're shed hunting, you're just trying to cover as much ground as possible, and you're looking for sheds. And so you can miss out on some of that stuff, or get too preoccupied to be doing the best diligence there. And so I would encourage people to approach it that way. Um, uh, why not just scout the whole time and only trip over a few antlers as it happens? I mean, you can do that. I just think that antlers, when you find sheds, it allows you to interact with so many more bucks. If all I ever interacted with were the bucks that I killed, well, I've never killed 2 bucks in a year. Um, uh, I've only ever killed 1 buck in a season. And so then if that's the only buck I get to interact with, I mean, great that I get him. I wouldn't trade that, but I like to be able to experience a lot of different deer. I like to look at their antlers and check them out. I like to get to know a little bit about where they hang out, what kind of food they like, and all that stuff. And when you go shed hunting, you get to interact with all that. There's a buck over on a piece of public ground that you and I both hunt, and I found sheds off that buck, the same shed, 2 years in a row. The first year I moved here, my son and I found his shed, and then last year, which was my second year living here, I went out with my son and daughter, and we were walking around, and we found that same shed, but it was like, I don't know, a quarter mile apart. And it seemed to favor the crop rotation of the year. That's information I found out about that buck. He also grew a lot from the first year that I saw him, and put on a lot. He would have been an impressive buck this year. In fact, I was kind of hunting him here in the late season, trying to find him, and hopefully, maybe somebody, it's public land. It's entirely possible somebody tagged him, but I'm hoping I find his shed again this year. And man, what a piece of history to have on that 1 buck. And in fact, I think you saw uh, possibly that buck. Sorry, my daughter's sneaking in
Oh,
on
that's
me here.
okay.
Uh, uh, my, but that's just some great. That's just some great. Yep. Why don't you go find mommy? Good girl. Um, what? Yep. Bye. Yep. I love you too. Sorry, guys. But um, she heard me talking about shed hunting. She had to kick the door down to get in here. But
Yeah, yeah, you're referencing one of my walkouts in mid-October,
yes, yes,
walking out of the property that you and I both hunt from time to time. And I saw this deer in my headlamp just after shooting hours had concluded in my headlamp. And he was only about maybe 25, 30 yards away and just looking at me. And he was really nice, I'll tell you that. I don't know
yeah,
if it was
yep,
the same one, but I kind of described him to you, and you immediately sent me some pictures of what you thought.
yep, yep. So shed hunting gives you that. It's exciting for your kids too. It's a great way to introduce them to the outdoors, and you know, uh, I just love sheds. I love antlers. There's something about the way the human brain, like, there's just different things that everybody likes, right? Doesn't matter who you are, you're gonna be intrigued by it. And antlers are one of those things. Um, when you get to see one of those laying down in the leaves, or under a tuft of grass, or like Caleb found one in the middle of a creek. It was half underwater. The one he found the other day. There's just like, it just gets you super excited. You know what I mean? And again, it allows you to interact with a buck that you didn't even have to tag. And there's tons of them out there, and they're free, and they're like, a like a scavenger hunt set up by nature for us just to go out and enjoy. And yeah, so uh, I'll be trying to focus more on scouting to set me up for a little bit better for hunting this coming fall. Early on, I'll be in the woods, that's for sure. Yeah, you know, and I also know, as you guys know, I have kids. I have 3 kids, and so my time at home is valuable too. So I can't get out as much as I did before I had kids, and as much as maybe some of you can get out, which is great. Get out there and find them, and so I understand, everyone's got a different situation. Maybe you burned a lot of that free time during deer season, and so now you got to stick around at home more during shed season. I get it, but if you can get away for a little bit, I've done a million after work shed hunts, like just real quick 30 to 45-minute shed hunts on my way home from work. Yeah, and just hop out of the car on a piece of ground that I have some permission on, or a piece of public land, and I just go pound it real quick. And man, you can find some great deer intel in that time frame, and you can find some sheds too. So um, there's in my opinion, like, every reason to go shed hunting, but I know I can't convince everybody, and that's okay too, because then I get to find more sheds.
Hey, one follow up before we end the podcast here today. All this snow that we talked about in the beginning,
Yeah.
Snowmageddon. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what the snow totals are like across the state, but like I told you here, just over this week, we're at about 16 or so inches where you and I are
Yep.
located. Can that be an advantage or is it a disadvantage to shed hunt in snow?
It's a well, to shed hunt in the snow is a disadvantage. Like, the actual shed hunting itself while you're doing it in the snow is not super productive. Not impossible, but not super productive, because the antlers will, they'll be buried. Sometimes if it's a real fresh shed after a heavy snow, you might see it tines sticking up out of the snow, or maybe even if it's a small enough shed, it might be sitting on top of the snow. But typically speaking, when there's deep snow like this, it's hard shed hunting. However, this snow is going to make for a good shed hunting year if the snow hangs around. Um, it's a little early. Like, if this weather was coming in, like, say, late January instead of mid January, or even better would be like early February. Um, it would be a haves and have nots shed season. And what I mean by that is, deer, there's always a shift. And what was interesting was, with our warmer temperatures this year, like, our home farm is, I've mentioned this before, great in October. But as soon as the crops come down, just the available habitat, and we just have some timber draws here. We don't have a lot of deer habitat when the corn comes down. And we go from, maybe 20 deer on our farm to like maybe 3 to 5. And then, but we'll have those 3 to 5 deer through November. But then once it gets cold, we don't have good thermal cover here. So the deer migrate out of here. They go, a mile and a half away from here, and they winter over there, and I have no access to them. And uh, this year, I wondered how that shift would happen, since it was so much warmer. I wondered if they would hang around longer, and they did not. They still made their yearly migration even with the warmer temps, and I think it also is influenced by the gun season. All the deer drives going on everywhere. I think that causes, that's like another part of the equation that um, gets deer to do their winter migration. And so, where they migrate to, that guy whose property I do not have access to, if he's a shed hunter, all those, the vast majority of deer, 90% of the deer in our area here, because he has the premier winter habitat, he's got 90% of the sheds on his farm, if it stays like this. Now, if it's a mild winter after this, let's say all the snow melts off, temperatures go back up into the 30s, deer are going to be willing to spread out a little bit more, and they're going to prioritize food a little bit more than thermal cover being close. They'll go to, meaning they'll go to a place that maybe isn't as good as good of winter habitat for a little bit more desirable food source or less competitive food source. And so then antlers can be scattered out. But if it stays cold and deep snow like this, man, they're just going where they can stay warm. And if there's a close food source, even better. And that's where they're going to be when they're dropping their antlers. And so it can make for a great year if you have access to those types of farms. But if you don't, if all you have is maybe a few timber draws or maybe public land that doesn't have any food around it, you're probably not going to find many sheds. And so it can be, this weather can lead to a haves and have-nots. And I think you asked me for a shed tip, and I should have given one earlier, so I'm sorry. But I'll throw that in there now. So the way I prioritize where I shed hunt is I do typically favor winter cover. So I'm looking for areas that have good thermal value. And the number one rule for that is south facing slopes. You might have the best cedar stand, red cedar stand. That's like ultimate thermal cover in the winter, right? Man, if I was in a survival situation, I would look for a red cedar to hide under, But if it's on a north facing slope, it's nowhere near as good as if it was on a south facing slope, soaking up all those daytime, sun rays on sunny days. And so a south facing slope is rule number one. And then rule number two is heavy timber. Deer like timber. They're a creature of the edge, yes, but nothing sets a great edge like timber does. So if you have timber on a south facing slope that then transitions into a grassy waterway, even better yet would be a patch of CRP, native grasses growing there. And then if there's a picked cornfield, or even better yet, a standing cornfield, if you can find a standing cornfield this time of year, maybe a guy couldn't get to because it was too wet or something, which I don't think would have been a problem this year. If you can find that near a big block of timber on a south facing slope, then you're really in business. So kind of put those things in order, and just look at your Spartan Forge for those types of locations. And don't be afraid to do some door knocking if you need to, or whatever else. And I guarantee you're going to be finding more sheds if you haven't been doing that already. But that being said, I would say the average shed hunter, finds one shed every 10 miles of walking, if they know what they're doing. Like if they know the right kind of place to look, they'll take them about 10 miles per shed. I also have found that, and that's like doing a lot of public land too. So a little bit more competition. Now, if you're on like really premium ground, and you know what you're doing, your average is probably going to be closer to like every, 5 to 7 miles. Sometimes it can be down to, like I've hit it where I've found, with a friend, we found, close to 15 sheds within 20 minutes. So sometimes that average can be really low, but there's other times where, it's, you're doing good if it's every 5 miles, if you're in like private access and so forth. And then another good rule to go by too is, usually when I'm doing a lot of public land shed hunting, or kind of like, maybe I have access to a decent property, but not a great property, I usually end up finding 5 dead deer for every shed that I find. It's just like I say that to illustrate the fact that yes, you could go to these awesome places, but it still takes time to find sheds. Like it is a thing where effort is rewarded. So you got to put the time in. The old phrase, miles for the piles. That's there's nothing more true than that than in shed hunting.
Real quick, the biggest shed I ever found, I was actually mushroom hunting, and
That's when it happens.
yeah, exactly. So this is a piece of property that I used to hunt with my brother. I mean, this was years ago. This was down in
Hmm.
Missouri. And I was just mushroom hunting along. I was following this edge of this timber, and then this slough kind of worked its way into the woods, and it fed into what became kind of a grassy little waterway. And
Sure.
I was trying to cross it because I was trying to work up where I thought I saw some elm trees. And I looked up ahead, and sitting right there in that little grassy waterway, sitting up was this, and I knew right away it was a big deer shed. So it was about 20
Yeah.
yards. I walked up
Oh, that's
there
a good
and picked
feeling.
it up, and believe it or not, so this was following the first year that we were hunting that property, and it was the shed off the biggest buck we had on camera. We called him
Oh,
Tips.
that's
He was
awesome.
he
That's
was, and I
awesome.
recognized it right away. He was a big 10 that his main beams came together and almost touched. And
That's awesome.
so looking back, I bet if I would have just looked around a little bit longer, I probably could have found the other side. But
Yeah,
anyways,
maybe. I mean, I'm glad you bring that up because that is something that a lot of people, I've, I'm not trying to say this in arrogance here, but I'm so obsessive with shed hunting that I have read almost every article there is out there on shed hunting. And I would say half of them will tell you, "Oh, do a 100-yard radius from that antler and you will probably find it." And I can tell you that that is not true. It's sometimes true, but um, uh, one year, my friend Caleb and we found, I think, 40 antlers on uh, this one part of a property, and we only matched one or two sets, and the match for the one set that I know for sure was found a mile and a half away, or no, it was 7/10 of a mile away. That's what it was. So, you know,
so when you hear those stories of
yes,
people walking up on a set, laying on top of each other, that's pretty rare then.
I oh yeah, I've had that happen before. I've had probably the wildest shed hunt I ever had. I was squirrel hunting on what will be this weekend back in 2021. Um, with my best friend Luke Fritch, and uh, I had stumbled over a deer carcass, and I noticed that it was a dead shed buck. The bases of his skull were still bloody, and he was totally picked clean. And I was like, "Hey, Luke, get over here. Look at this." And I was like, "I bet these sheds are within a quarter mile of here." And he just goes, "Oh, here they are." And 5 yards away from this dead deer under the ice and snow. So this thing shed. We had an ice storm that year on New Year's Day, and these things were buried below that ice. And so this buck had shed and died in December, and his antlers, I kid you not, I'll send you the picture after we're done here, were stacked on top of it. And he was a big, nice buck. Like these antlers would make it into North American Shed Hunters Club. Um, uh, just a great match set, and they were literally as if someone had laid them there, stacked
Wow.
on top of each other. Yeah. So sometimes you get lucky like that, but most times miles for the piles.
Yeah. Well, that buck I told you about, Tips. He was probably in the mid 150s that season. We got
That's a
some
nice
some
buck.
bunch of trail cam pictures of him that year. The following season, we had just a few trail cam pictures of him, and he blew up. Probably was pushing 170s, and
That's awesome.
the hunter that hunts the neighboring farm got him during rifle season. So,
Yep.
and he
Yeah,
was a
that's how it
monster.
goes.
He was a monster, I tell you.
But because I mean, I guess you weren't technically shed hunting, you were mushroom hunting, but because you found his shed, you got a piece of that buck that you really wish you could have tagged. You know what I mean? Like right there, it shows the value of shed hunting. Like you got to enjoy something from that buck, even though you didn't necessarily get to be the one to tag him.
And where I found it, I had never set foot before that day. And it just, as I looked around, just kind of said, this is kind of an interesting little area that this guy
Yeah.
was passing through right here. And I wonder why he
Yep.
was.
Yep. Exactly. And that's the scouting value right there. Yep.
So, hey, Kent, we've taken up a lot of time here. Appreciate you coming on the show. And we'll have to talk more as the year goes along, man.
Absolutely. And don't forget, there's still some time to get out there and hunt rabbits and squirrels. I plan to do some of that myself, and even quail hunting technically goes to the end of the month here. So it'll be pretty tough right now, but maybe if you got down to the real southern edge of the state there on our Missouri border, maybe you could get into some quail yet this year.
Sounds good. Hey, man, good luck to you.
Yep, you too, bud. Thanks for having me on. Take care.
You bet. That's Kent Boucher with the First Gen Hunter podcast right here on Brownfield's Outdoor Adventures. I'm Brent Barnett. Thanks for watching this week.